Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good afternoon. Thank you for giving good to see Prof. Dr. Rahmat. He is actually my guru in international law perspective. So good to see you again, Dato'. I'm honored also to be surrounded by various interagency and also other scholars like Prof. Beckmans and Dr. Nguyen and many others familiar faces here. But what I intend to do pretty much just to probably share some of the operational aspect. I think the first session this morning we had a very good deliberation on this issue of some of the pertinent aspect of the law of the sea, all the gaps and constraints that we are facing. Obviously, insofar as Navy is concerned, we are rendered to be the tools used by the government to achieve national interests at the end of the day. And like it or not, we are playing at the same area of the sea. You know, we are dealing with law of the sea within this context of South China Sea, full of complexity, and not to mention dealing with our boundaries as well, full of negotiation and also projection in terms of our conducts and behavior on the grounds. At the end of the day, we are also affected insofar as Navy is concerned on the ground. We are also affected by all these instruments of law and policies. And then I must address and I must put it across here that it is very important that the command, especially on the ground, imagine as a captain of the ships, when taking charge of the situation, must consider all these aspects at the same time to ensure the tensions, conflicts, the incidents on the ground can be controlled, so much so to avoid any potential great conflict in the area. So I'm tasked to cover these three main aspects. I think pretty much also covered by previous speakers on military activities in the context of how it reflects and how it should be observed and conducted within the regime of Territorial Sea and EEZ. And towards the last part of it, I'll just mention a bit about the FONOP in terms of how this FONOP operation is actually conducted and how we see the response from various actors on the ground. I think to start this discussion, I'd like to emphasize again and reiterate these three major points here that pretty much also covered this morning. That we are dealing with the previously, we talked about open sea, mare liberum, and now that we have gone further beyond national jurisdiction, and so much so the interest of coastal states to control the area under the pretext of marine closure. So in its base and substance, the way we observe about these activities in a way affected us generally in these three aspects. When we see increased jurisdiction of all these coastal states activities, in particular in relation to that sui generis area of EEZ, you will see a lot of increased activity. For obvious reason, a lot of enforcement, presence at sea, and so on and so forth. Malaysia also, just to share with you, we are also establishing a lot of new agencies, in particular our MIMA, Maritime Enforcement Agency, which was pretty much very new in this business as well. They were established way back in 2006. And the second aspect of it as a result of the reduced high sea, we are talking about the very much a lot of control on the EEZ because of the reduced high sea, therefore impose greater qualification on that nature of freedoms. You see, this is also a very important aspect, like we discussed this morning, whether that freedom should be absolute or not. And thirdly, obviously, the main issue here, I think, which is very fundamental, we are very much interconnected, and so much so a lot of overlapping due to this maritime zoning, as a result of which you will find that most of scholars, I believe, even to the extent concluded that one of the major issue in regards to conflict at sea was as a result of the law establishment of this law this year as well. So that's up upon us how to actually reconcile this understanding again. And I'd like to bring you the same diagram. This is a depiction of where we are now insofar as our activities on the ground. I would say this is the most critical aspect of it. Not that I mentioned here we don't have any much problem, but insofar as practice is concerned, this two area is basically divided in that sense, by way of, I would say here, the obligation is very much different. And this morning also we covered about so much so activity of exploration and exploitation, which is part and parcel of the coastal states' rights, whether this can be extended in terms of managing the safety and security of this area, as opposed to general sovereign rights given to the coastal state in relation to living and non-living resources, marine environment, so on and so forth. And not just about surface activity, it is also about underwater and the airspace. Obviously, the airspace is different branch of law altogether, but you'll find that when we talk about EDIS this morning, the issue has now come into this area of controlling this international airspace by some of these coastal states by invoking this understanding of law at sea. And I think I agree with the statement made by Prof. Beckman this morning that the other crucial aspect in relation to activities at sea, in particular in regards to warships or any government person, is in relation to the rights of passengers. This is not fairly quite settled yet at the moment, I suppose. In particular, in regards to these three regime of passages: innocent passage, transit passage, and ASL passage, especially so when it becomes entangled with this area of 12 nautical mile. You see, I understand that the innocent passage is not very much an issue of the list of prohibition under the Article 19.2. Probably, if you find in the UNCLOS, there are about 21 prohibition of the innocent passage that deemed to be prejudicial to the coastal states. But another issue which is also seen to be the practice of the coastal states now, invoking the requirements of prior notification, which is obviously you cannot find anywhere in the existing convention. And other than that, the transit passage and ASL passage, or archipelagic sea lane passage, although it is sort of identical with the requirements of innocent passage, it extended the meanings toward operating all ships, or warships for that matter, should operate in their normal modes of continuous and expeditious while transiting from one part of the high sea to another part of the high sea, and also transiting through this body of water. So what it means by normal modes, I think we have got some incidences just to share with you. For instance, like because transit passage is only applied, as mentioned earlier, is only applied in the straight use for international navigation. So in this case, the understanding is normal modes is not fairly quite settled, because some countries interpret it in a very liberal sense. In a way, when their presence in our Straits of Malacca, in a way we see it as posing sort of, if it is not stretch, but in a way they are doing some gathering and to some extent enforcing the area, which is obviously this is against our understanding of the littoral states' responsibility of managing the straits, i.e. it should be rest upon Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore and Thailand to ensure the safety and security of the strait. So again, as I said, the understanding of that normal modes within this application of this transit passage, and at the same time ASL passage in the archipelagic water, I came across along with our interaction with Indonesian partners. They are talking about some issue in designating this ASL passage in the first place. South, north, south, and west, east kind of ASL passage is not really settled within this archipelago, and in this case probably Philippines and Indonesia is one of the countries that should emphasize more on this application of ASL passage within that region. And just to quickly, again, this has been the repetition of what has been said earlier about the rights of foreign ships and aircraft in the EEZ. So you will find that two sides of the same coin. While coastal states have got the rights over, or sovereign rights over this area, maritime states or other user states shall enjoy their freedoms, and cross-reference to the Article 87, which in relation to freedom of the high sea. But to what extent this freedom of the high sea should be observed within this application of EEZ, that is another issue. And even Prof. Beckman also mentioned about this understanding or meaning of internationally lawful use of the sea is also not quite settled, in terms of what sort of activities, in particular military activities, would it be lawful in that sense if it is applied in the EEZ. Here you are, the main source of attentions. I just put it into this two contexts of maritime states and coastal states, where you find that maritime state insists the freedom of military activities in the EEZ, and the concern of their naval and air access and mobility. And as opposed to that, coastal state is also concerned about their own sovereignty and national interests, and others cannot simply carry out any military activities without their consent. This practice has been, widely known, by many. In fact, countries make declaration for that matter, and they registered it in the United Nations, I suppose. And Malaysia is also privy to that. Malaysia made the same declaration. I just picked up, some of the example of this. You may find in the UN website if you like. So basically, the contention made by majority of our coastal states in reference to this particular word, where by virtue of this convention, the way that we understand that this convention do not authorize other states to carry out military exercises, maneuvers, and in particular those involving use of weapon or explosive in the EEZ without the consent of the coastal state. So I think this declaration has been made as early as far as Malaysia is concerned, as early as when we ratified the UNCLOS way back in 1996, if I can remember that correctly. And moving on some of the same thing, I would say same argument about other areas of contention. As I mentioned earlier on just now about the freedom and the very words of this lawful use of the sea, having due regard, what regard is due for that matter in respects of coastal states and maritime states in this aspect of Article 58 of the EEZ. You'll find that maritime states or other user states, or probably US, in the US interest, the meaning of due regard is for them is to for other users to refrain from interfering with the coastal states' rights over the area. Meaning to say, coastal states' rights over the area is very much confined to that particular of living and non-living resources. That's all, nothing more. As far as coastal states' understanding of due regard is basically other user state shall have due regards about the activities or powers of the coastal state and national interests of the coastal state, sovereignty of the coastal state, so much so not to pose any possible threats to the territorial integrity of the coastal states. So I think the rival between the two is not well defined in any way within this premise of conventions. Yeah? Again, this fundamental question about whether or not military activities is basically permissible under the convention, and is there any limit to that? I think so far as literature is concerned, you will find quite a lot. Just to share with you some of the literature reading based on this understanding written by Roach and Smith, what military activity is all about. It's also including military survey. So I'd like to touch a bit on that. You'll find that the debate on military surveys, especially with the advance of technology nowadays, a lot of this now being discussed at many forums, especially within the context of Navy forum, Navy interactions, and some even argued that some military intelligence collection conducted in the EEZ might also be considered coming within the scopes of MSR. Well, we can argue about it because MSR is under the purview of jurisdiction of the coastal state. If that being the case, I mean, this is obviously under the purview of coastal states, and everything that you want to do within the context of that scientific research must get consent from the coastal states. And of course, intelligence collection activities now are likely to expand rapidly, especially with the increasing electronic warfare and information warfare. Not only intensive, probably in the future, could be intrusive. Yeah. And some of the example in terms of what we are talking about here about this survey just now, just to share with you this 2009 case of Impeccable incident, where USNS Impeccable conducted the routine seabed mapping and tracking the submarine off the coast of Hainan. So China argued that nature of survey was in violation of their rights under the international law, but obviously US was against it. So again, it's quite difficult to define, the operational test of this. Was there any guideline so far in terms of how we define this? I'll come to about that aspect in a moment. Just very quickly on this FONOP, I think this has been mentioned and explained in greater length just now. While the main issue with regards to FONOP is basically the application and the nature of the engagement. I would like to stress upon the nature of the engagement, how it's being done on the ground, yeah, where you challenge the legitimacy or legality of the innocent passage within that context of 12 nautical mile. The other one, you challenge also about the zone generated from the LTEs, like Prof. Batman mentioned just now, and also challenging the status of the EEZ and the overflag. When we say challenging the authority, you find that more incidences happens. Yeah, I do not know whether this will do greater benefits or more risk, but generally physical challenge on the pretext of FONOP probably would create more incidences happen. Probably that's what our Prime Minister Tun Mahathir, he emphasized that, and he don't like to see more ships in the vicinity, because the tendency when you do FONOPs and you start to challenge very aggressively, this is what happened. And true enough, the recent incidents of USS Dikata in the vicinity of Gavin Reef recently on 30th September, which nearly collided with the Chinese destroyer, yeah, as a result of this FONOP engagement on the ground. And on the other hand, of course, the state also used to some extent to their advantage as an incentive to compel, I suppose, other international community sort of to acknowledge their claim or the status of whatever in terms of maritime zone that generating from the South China Sea conflict. So the ongoing dilemma, well, it is not easy to basically final, I would say, to address this issue of military activities, especially within the context of EEZ. It's quite controversial. It has been 36 years already, been talking about the same issue. I suppose I remember when I was still a young lieutenant, I attended the first maritime law conference in Canberra. That was my first encounter about this issue of military activities in EEZ. That was what, 2005. Until now, we are talking about the same thing. And I guess to prevent the conflicts is entirely impossible. But how to reduce it, I think this is the main issue. In particular, with regards to us being the white guy on the ground, we need to ensure that this thing can be sort of controlled, not to escalate some unnecessary tension on the ground, which will do no good to this region. And the way forward, I think, just to share a bit on what we do, we have got many forums too, among the brothers at arms, among the navies, in particular within the context of Western Pacific Naval Symposium, the groupings of 21, I think now the grouping almost to 30 nations already. we talks about, things at sea. While you guys talk about all these strategic issue, in relation to interstate relationship, we talks about what's happened at sea and how we should behave and control insofar as activities on the ground. Although that we know various national policy may differ, but we have a code called Qs. I note that we mentioned about Qs just now, but Qs in a way was first, just to share, was first reviewed in Kuala Lumpur 2012. The RMN was given the task to look at it, and then it was later endorsed in 2014. This is very important mechanism for us to, in a way, behave at sea when we meet each other, so much so to avoid any escalation of tension and possible untoward incident. The other thing is I'd like to refer to this EEZ Group 21, probably Prof. Beckman, where, this is quite old document, but I think it should be given another new look of this guideline, if you like, guideline for navigation and overflag and the EEZ. So this was the good effort of Ocean Policy Research Foundation from Japan. It was established in 2005, and then I think in the light of these cases or issues, or complexity of the subsidency issue that we discussed today, I think we should also consider this guideline at the moment, so that we can use, especially agencies on the grounds, navies on the ground, to avoid possible escalation of tensions. End of the day, before I finish, I suppose freedoms are not absolute. It should be controlled, otherwise the world will be chaotic. Thank you.